All right, hello, recording folks. We just went for 2 minutes without recording. We're just started the meeting and doing a check-in on the 1.7 release that's coming up soon. So we just touched on external secret store support and said there's a pull request open. Move off. Do you want to give an update on the webhook work you're doing?
Yeah. So the webhook work would be in two parts. Actually the original design doc is not merged yet, but I already started prototyping, and I thought separating the certificate part as a separate PR, because whatever we do with the design doc, the choice is there. You have to have the certificate stuff figured out with API server and providers. So that PR is open now in a draft state. Once I manually test it and see everything works, it should be ready for review. What it does is essentially it accepts a TLS secret that is a known type for Kubernetes users, and it mounts it to Kubernetes itself and also mounts it to all providers on a given path given with an environment variable, so that they can optionally use it in their webhook servers if they implement any. Anyone or any provider or Crossplane maintainers wouldn't have to worry about any kind of certificate handling for their webhook server and just write the logic. And one additional thing there is that we inject that CA bundle to CRD's webhook strategy field because it is required to be there. So we inject that if there is a webhook strategy chosen. So that is a little bit unusual than other stuff than other projects in the community, at least from what I can tell, where they use Customize or some other tooling to do that injection. We do that in the Crossplane package manager and also Crossplane init container that applies those CRDs. So yeah, I'm planning to wrap that whole webhook thing up in the next sprint. And I'm planning to do a demo about immutable fields just to demonstrate it, and then go into other examples and conversion topics and stuff.
Nice, that's great. All right, removing deprecated APIs. I have no memory of this. Did anyone on this call add this to the sprint? Like it's merged and what is this?
I think this is here accidentally because
this is an old issue, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna remove that one from the board. All right, and support layer descriptor annotators in the package manager. Dan, is this something that you added?
Yep, it is finishing, I guess implementing the X package spec, which will be part of 1.7. This isn't a huge effort, but I just need to get it done.
Makes sense. If anyone else has anything that they're working on in Crossplane 1.7, please do feel free to mention it in chat or add it to a Slack DM for me, and I'll make sure the board is updated.
Yeah, there is the identity-based authentication for providers. Alper was planning on opening a new issue for that, but he hasn't yet. But at the same time, it's not gonna make it to 1.7 because he had to focus on the scaling issues, which we will talk in a minute. So yeah, in 1.7 time frame, we would probably have only discovery part of that problem.
Right, sounds good. All right, let's unless anyone has anything else, let's move on from the 1.7 project board. There's a question we usually ask, which is basically about community priorities. So just want to give a second to check whether anyone came here today to advocate for something that's on our roadmap or not on our roadmap, or something that should be worked on soon, or if there's anyone here who is interested in working on something on our roadmap sooner rather than later.
Can you tell us something about composition revisions? Because we are very interested in this in our setups.
Yeah, that relates to maybe touches on a topic I've got a little bit later on.
Okay, cool.
Which is roughly, there hasn't been much progress on it lately, but we have an idea of what to do next. But I'm realizing that I personally don't have the bandwidth to drive a lot of things forward, so I'm kind of looking for volunteers. So if that's something you'd be interested in working on, for example, I'd be happy to set up regular sessions with you and team up to get it implemented.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's talk later.
Cool. All right. So yep, as notes there that those two PRs are up. So providers, CRD scaling issues. I'll let Move-Off mostly touch on this one, but the background context is that for a while now, we've noticed with our bigger providers, mostly the new Terrajet ones, which are hundreds, but even with provider AWS, we've seen the seen the API server and clients struggling to handle that many CRDs. We've made and worked with the community, the Kubernetes community, to make a bunch of fixes, but they've only been partial fixes. So Move-Off, take it away.
Yeah. So the fix that Nick just mentioned was about CRDs blowing up the API server with very high CPU and memory usage for a while during the installation. So that problem is gone, and it's trickled down to all cloud providers as well. So the problem right now that we're facing is the client throttling stuff, which is it's mostly actually it's mostly a configuration issue in kubectl, where it just limits itself for the request that it makes to Discovery service. And there is a PR actually. Let me link it here. There's a draft PR from Alpert that does a deep dive on this issue. And explains how it works, what affects it, and also what are the criteria set that we expect to work. We expect from that kubectl calls, and the tools that will allow you to easily test your suggestions or solutions. So I'll just link it here. In addition to that client throttling stuff, there is another issue. I mean, another issue is that there is, apart from the first burst that we used to experience, there's a continuous high memory usage when you install 1,000 CRDs. And that is usually okay. It's around 3 gigabytes or 3.5 gigabytes for API server. But the problem is the cloud providers, some of the cloud providers, specifically GK, is not able to scale in a manner that is invisible to the user. For EKS and Azure Kubernetes service, there's no disruption at all, but GK regional and GK zonal clusters struggle with scaling to that resource usage. So they get into they start to give timeouts and stuff. So another issue that he is looking into right now is profiling API server to see whether there's an apparent hotspot in the memory usage. I think in the stand-up today he shared that there is a conversion from V1 Beta 1 to V1 in CRD API extensions, V1 Beta 1 from and to V1. That is probably unnecessary, but also happening. So we might get something like that, that is unnecessary, but still there and eating up the memory, and we could just fix it. But I don't have the details yet because he hasn't updated the PR yet. But yeah, and the other thing Nick just mentioned is that in 1.24, the fixes that we made, or we accelerated to be merged to client side, were not effective, and the new fix from someone else made them effective. And now in 1.24 of kubectl, we don't experience client side throttling mostly. If you have one or two jet providers, if you have 3 of them, you would see the message, but it wouldn't be as bad as today. So yeah, this is a little a summary of the issues. The PR is up there. and we're planning to make it ready for review this week. And there are some action items on it as well, and also the criteria set. So please go ahead and take a look at that criteria set and see if they would work for you. For example, I mean, I suggested it to be a bit specific, hey, kubectl get pods, let's say, should return in that time frame, let's say. So these kind of criteria set that we will call hey, okay, we're done. The scaling issues are completely gone. Those kind of things from UX perspective, feel free to drop them as a comment on that PR.
Yeah, for the client side stuff, the underlying problem is just that clients make, I think it was at least one request to the API server per API group that exists to discover what types are there. So you can imagine if there's tens or hundreds of API groups, that takes a while. And the clients also currently have a somewhat naive, let's say, throttling implementation, client-side throttling implementation that doesn't really, that was just the numbers of which were picked, assuming that there would be 10 CRDs or something like that in the system, not hundreds or thousands.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of client-side work that can be done, I think, just to bump up the client-side throttling, which I think is what's been happening. But another thing that we've seen folks suggest is potentially using API server-side priority and fairness with API server will just tell you when it needs you to rate limit it effectively as an option. And there's been some very rudimentary discussion of potentially just rethinking the whole discovery process, because it's just effectively it's quite inefficient overall, and it's just done at times that it doesn't need to be done sometimes. It's worth noting that these improvements we're seeing are specific to the kubectl code base. So other clients that use client Go, I do think we probably need to move the fix sort of down into the client Go libraries at some point. Otherwise, just anything else that uses client Go will be seeing these issues. But things like Kubernetes controllers, people don't notice that much if they take a few more seconds to start up. It's not that bad. It's mostly when it happens on client side that's a problem. UI side. All right, Buff, I think I can maybe hear people in your co-working space.
Oh yeah, sorry, what?
I think if you don't mind muting, I think there's someone talking behind you that's coming through on your headphones. All right, although I believe we're going to ask Muvaf to unmute basically straight away anyway, because the next topic is that we're some of us Crossplane maintainers are investigating options to dedupe the big three providers. It's mostly just something that Muvaf and I have been speaking about so far, so we do need to loop in other maintainers of provider AWS, etc., like Christopher here. The general idea is the team here at Upbound sort of released and donated this TerraJet project a little while ago to help generate providers to get a lot of resource coverage really quickly by generating providers that use sort of Terraform behind the scenes under the hood. And because that was early alpha software and we wanted to get it out there and get people's feedback, we launched that as its own separate provider, distinct from, let's say, provider AWS, provider GCP, etc. In some cases, so in cases where there were existing providers for a thing, we sort of just duplicated them using TerraJet, and I think that was the right call to make, because it gave us all the feedback we've now got about like the CRD scaling and things like that. So it was a good way to test the waters. But now we're starting to wonder whether we want to keep them as separate providers long term, or whether we should look into sort of finding a way to merge them together with let's say, merge the TerraJet provider AWS and the provider AWS together. So I know Muvaf and I are both working on some documents with thoughts about this that are going to be coming out soon. We're not going to commit to anything yet, but keep an eye out for that. And if you have thoughts on the general topic, definitely let us know. Christopher, I'm particularly curious, what you would think if, let's say, provider AWS was sort of a mix of the controllers that it has today and sort of TerraJet. Let's say if we took the 120 resources we have today, let's say, kept them in provider AWS, but then sort of backfilled the rest with Terrajet resources is one potential option that we could go for.
I think we also in the company thought about this, but our biggest issue currently is the CAD scaling issue. That we say we need to fix this first, because nobody thought about what happened if we add so many CRDs to the current provider AWS, because fair enough, we have a lot of use cases running on our setups. And the other stuff we thoughting about is how looks the process to get more stuffs implemented against the API from AWS and move out after that the Terrajet stuff from the providers. So we're seeing the issue in general that the community has stopped working on the general implementing against the APIs, because Terrajet stuff is adding so much new resources there. But in our setups, we see the problems that we have also so many open issues in the Terraform world, and the HashiCorp guys are not merging them because they have not so many people's working on their stuffs. So I don't know at the moment. Without the scaling issues, we have a little bit problems if we want to merge them.
Yeah, definitely. I think before we do anything, we'll be needing to have an answer for those scaling solutions. I don't think it would do scaling problems rather.
And fair enough. I think a lot. I think Muafak says something about you see in GCP the issues, but we also see the issues in AWS, because we're talking with the professional services, for example, and we see also that our master nodes and so on, API servers using a lot of memory there, and AWS make a great job in the background, but they talk without what are you doing on servers, because we're seeing so much memory usage on there. We had a discussion with our technical account manager this week, what we're doing there, because we have, I don't know, 10 or 15 Crossplane instances running, and all of them using so much memory if we enabled the jet providers, for example. So yeah.
That's funny. That's good to know. So EKS works, but
yeah, it is works, but I think AWS makes a lot of tapes on the API service that is running, and we're not seeing issues there, but they see the issues, I think, and that's why we had a discussion this week.
Right. Yeah, I have a friend who works on EKS, and he's definitely reached out to us before and been like, "Hey, what are you all doing?" When we've been like running Crossplane tests and sending tons and tons of API traffic. Okay.
In general, it's not an issue from AWS if you say to them, "Okay, we're running Crossplane on it," but they see what we're doing there.
Cool. Anything else on that topic from you, Muvaf, or should we move on to talking about the next Terrajet release?
Yeah, not much. I mean, I was planning to actually open the proposal PR before the community meeting and present it, but it couldn't make it. So I will update this agenda with proposal PR link once it's ready, and of course we'll post on Slack about it to get more thoughts and opinions about what to do there.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone else has any feedback, please drop it on the tracking issue that Christopher links there. Okay, so Terrajet 0.4 is out. Any new or exciting features in that release?
Yeah, well, there are a bunch of bug fixes and other stuff, but there are two big things I think worth mentioning. One is that so in the Terrajet guide, it would direct you to import the Go module of the TF provider so that it can process the schema to generate the CRD. But with this release, we are using Terraform CLI schema command to print a JSON, to get it to print a JSON of the schema of the whole provider, and then process that JSON schema, which would allow you to not import the TF provider at all. And this is important because, like, we have seen people, like, having dependency issues with TF providers they import. There are, like, bunch of unexpected errors you get with some of the specialist small providers that have dependency conflicts with their own stuff. So yeah, that is, like, a good improvement. And the other thing is that Sergen has worked on, like, opening up an interface for initializers, to add an initializer to the managed reconciler, and also a generic tagger implementation. So you can use that generic tagger implementation if it works for you, or, like, write your own initializer and use it in all of your CRDs whenever possible, or, like, for only for the ones that have tags field, let's say, you can have such heuristics. So that is also, like, another thing. And there are bug fixes. Let me actually link the release here. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice, thank you.
Thanks for this, because it unblocks us for PagerDuty, for example, and Myra Security. We have in-house running jet providers for this, and it's instantly fixing our issues for this.
Nice.
Great.
All right, so we're into the sort of community topics and questions section. Before I have a topic that I added here, before we touch on that, I want to check whether anyone else has a topic or a question that they'd like to ask.
Actually, the Elastic Terajet provider.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped right over that.
I can do that one. I was hoping Darren might be here because Darren did all the work on it, but we use Elasticsearch at Upbound, and we use Elastic Cloud. And so we wanted to have a provider to manage our clusters. And Darren, who works on some of this stuff internally, built this provider. So we're definitely looking at having a 0.1 release probably this week or next. So if anyone else is interested, we'd love for other folks to get involved. And it was super easy to get spun up. So shout out to the folks who have built and are working on Terajet.
Yeah, thank you, folks. All right, sorry about that. So back to soliciting community topics and questions. Anyone have anything on their mind? All right. Well,
so I added one issue after your max reconcile rate.
I saw, yeah.
Because we updated in our setup yesterday and also today our provider AWS to the latest version. And for example, we see an issue with sync packages that CRDs are controlled from the latest provider. And one question we have is how many provider revisions we normally see under owner references. Can someone answer this question?
Dan, this seems like something that might be your area of expertise, but shouldn't it be basically I believe any provider revision that actually delivered that type of custom resource keeps an owner reference? So if you've had 10 provider revisions and all 10 of them, the package for that revision had, let's say, the RDS instance CRD in it, I believe all 10 will keep an owner reference against that that CRD, and only one of them that is active will be the controller reference of that. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, that's correct. And also a few releases back, we made a change to also have the top level object, the provider configuration, own it, which is just an additional owner ref. So you'll have a number of revisions that own it, and then the provider configuration itself. That is just to guard against cases where you have to do some sort of manual intervention when you're doing an upgrade and you delete an old revision just to make sure that the CRDs hang around.
Okay. So we have a short discussion with what's the name? Karl-Henrik Lunde. He's also a maintainer and provider AWS. And we talked about this because he see this issue also before. And what we did now is to bump our max reconcile rate to 100. And it immediately fixed our issue that an old revision is controlled the CRDs. And we are not knowing why this fixed the issue. So
would-
can we so what we really don't know is, for example, we have more than 10,000 managed resources in the cluster. Can we say something about, I don't know, more than 5,000 or 10,000? We need to bump the reconcile rates, or we need to bump the CPUs, because this only fixed our issues in the clusters. So at the end, we bumped in all clusters the CPU request to 1,000 millicores and bump max reconcile rate to 100, and it fixed the issue on all of the clusters with the CRDs are controlled by an old provider revision, and we're not knowing why.
I would guess that what's actually happening here is when you bumped the reconcile rates, it just restarted the controller, which in queue to reconcile. So like the first time it came around and picked up, I don't think it's well, I don't want to say absolutely, but I doubt it had to do with actually the changing of the reconcile rate, whatever value there. I'm imagining
but I can add something. If we only so we played around in a few clusters. So if we only for example bump the CPUs to 1,000 millicores, we had the same issue. Nothing changed. And
so,
if you change the reconcile rates, then the issue is gone.
Sorry, so you changed the reconcile rate, but did not change the CPU, and the issue went away?
Yes, and then it's fixed for all, for example, eight clusters without issues.
Is it the only other idea that comes to my mind, which I don't have high confidence in, is could it be that with so many things in the system, the reconcile is just not getting a chance to run?
Yeah, I think that's possible. It seems like it could either be if it's, getting CPU throttled, it seems like that could trigger the context deadline, or what you're saying, Nick, I guess could also be the case if it's just getting rate limited really hard. But I am kind of surprised to hear that. So I definitely want to look in that a little more.
What we're seeing, for example, I can add a lot of more things, because we had this, we snapshot our monitoring systems. But what we see is in the Crossplane container that we see client throttlings on the server, and if we bump the reconcile rates, it is completely gone. We see nothing like this.
That makes
interesting.
So max reconcile rate actually has it's intended to be a simple flag in front of a bunch of related knobs. So when you bump up the max reconcile rate, it is actually bumping up the amount of parallelism behind the scenes. It's also, it literally affects the reconcile rate and a rate limiter, but it also adds more parallelism, and it also adds the ability to do more requests. So it bumps up the request burst threshold, basically, and an actual request rate threshold to the API server. So if your problem was that you were being rate limited for too long and like never being able to get around to sort of succeeding with a request, bumping max reconcile rate, I could see helping with that, because it's going to basically let you make more requests.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because when every iteration, which we changed the way that the revisions reconcile the frequency at which they do, but every time through, they're going to touch every object they've installed, which is obviously quite a lot. And so that could definitely update your rates there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
No worries. All right. Next topic is one that I added, which is effectively I have a couple of projects that I started that I am just not able to keep up with at the moment. My role here has changed a lot at Upbound, and I'm spending a lot of time sort of reviewing architecture and trying to do sort of broad leadership things across the Crossplane community, and I get very little time to code, sadly. The three things that I've added here, that this is basically a call out for new maintainers for these first two providers, and for people who are interested in becoming maintainers or contributors to Crossplane. The composition revisions of max reconcile rate sort of functionality is sort of half implemented at the moment and needs to be taken past the finish line. So I'll go through these in order. It's I think roughly from sort of most to least needed. Provider SQL is a provider that models SQL databases, not instances, but actual databases, users, etc., etc. I started this provider, and we did have 2 other maintainers on it, but those folks have since moved on, either moved to companies that don't use Crossplane or gone on months-long vacation in one case. I can't keep up with the PRs that are against there, and also, ironically, for someone who was an SRE for 10 years, I actually don't know SQL that well. So people are adding a bunch of features about like advanced Postgres and MySQL sort of user features and grants and things like that I don't understand the API calls myself or the SQL calls. So I definitely feel that this provider could use attention from just anyone to begin with, but definitely could use attention from someone who knows SQL. So if anyone's interested in any of these, feel free to pipe up now and or let me know at some point. The next one is provider Terraform, which, unlike the Terrajet providers, is a provider that just you pass it a big blob of Terraform and it just goes and runs Terraform. Yuri has helped out on this one a little bit here, and I'm kind of hoping that Yuri might be interested in taking on a maintainer role to help sort of review PRs and move things forward on this. But we totally could use other folks as well. It is one of the more simple providers, I guess, because it only has one kind of managed resource, which is a Terraform configuration. But there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes there.
Yeah, definitely happy to take this one over. So I was touching it and people contacting me regarding this configuration. So kind of natural transition.
Nice, and I'm totally happy to continue to be a resource for if you want to swap notes or ask questions or whatever. I just don't have that much time to review PRs and actually fix things.
Cool.
So on these both providers are both on the I believe I'm the Crossplane contributor org at the moment, and I basically am just going to, if folks are interested, I'm just going to make you a maintainer and let you run with it.
Sounds good.
All right, then the other 2 things that we have here are features in either Crossplane or permeating the Crossplane community. One is getting composition revisions to V1 Beta 1. So composition revisions, Christopher was asking about before, we added it as V1 Alpha 1, so it's behind a feature flag and it's turned off by default. We have got some good feedback from folks that it's pretty useful. The most concrete request of it came from Gillian Hill's team, effectively asking for a way to consistently specify a composition revision across clusters, because at the moment when you create a revision, it has sort of a randomly generated name, so it's not possible to create a claim that pins to a particular revision across any clusters. We have discussed, I actually forget where it was, I think it was at a different issue, but we've discussed some approaches to do this using label selectors and you could put semantic version, for example, in a composition revision selector. So I think we have a good way forward on this. I just haven't had time to work on it. So this is another area where I'm happy to partner with someone if they're interested in actually doing the work to add that feature, which would make us feel good about getting this to V1 Beta 1.
Can you link the other issue, because we are also interested in this, because in our because in our setup we're also using GitOps and nobody knows exactly in all of our different clusters what is the revision and so on. So thanks.
Yeah, I specific like the channel idea there. Like, you can up to a stable composition revision channel for certain resources, and for some others like the beta or like alpha, so that platform team can like update the latest revision on specific channels.
Did you comment about that channel feature somewhere?
In the other issue, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea in general, but I also like the introducing a concept of a channel. I like the symmetry of keeping selector next to ref for so I don't know if it'd be possible to have channel as just a convention with labels or something like that. But I don't know. This seems like something that needs a maybe if not a one-pager, a detailed comment proposal or something like that before we go forward.
Oh, gotcha. So you're saying like, you would choose a label called stable and then remove that stable label from the old revision and put it onto new revision so that like, it would be selected.
Yeah, that's what I didn't think through it very deeply, to be completely honest. I was mostly just commenting that adding a new concept of channel in there has less sort of symmetry with all the other references than having selector with labels. But yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I think if we make the references over there, like, continuously resolve, then that would make sense. I mean, it would essentially be the same thing, right? So.
Yeah, that was kind of the big gotcha in this one, actually, was that most of our references aren't continuously resolved, by which we mean when you set a label selector, that resolves a reference. So it looks for something, there's a bunch of references throughout Crossplane. So in this case, if you added a label selector, hypothetically, if we use the default behavior, what would happen would be it would select a composition revision based on the labels, set the reference, and then just stop doing resolution. The reference is set. I don't need to check my label selectors again. That's how we would normally do it. But in order to actually make it work, so that if something else changed to be like the stable revision or something like that, we would need to, on every reconcile, resolve those label selectors and see if something changed, and then propagate the updates potentially. And then we also need to deal with, like, we wouldn't necessarily, if multiple things were labeled stable, we potentially wouldn't want to just like randomly change composition revision on every reconcile or whatever. So
yeah,
stuff to work through there.
Yeah, there's actually an issue in Crossplane runtime where references being optionally resolved. So maybe like, we can add another option like that. Like, by default, it would keep the current behavior, but like, you can make it refresh on every reconcile with a field there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which field exactly would go. Like, match tables is essentially a map of strings, so ref could have it because it's a struct. But yeah, it could be an option there.
I think you could probably put it under, like getting into design here, I think you could probably put it under selector, because it's you've got like foo selector and then you have match labels. So you could have like match label behavior as like a policy or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Cool. All right. So yes, anyway, more broadly, all of that we just talked about is one of the many things that I don't realistically see myself getting around to doing anytime soon. So help wanted. The final thing, which is maybe a kind of a good first issue or something. It's very boilerplatey, is what I'm saying, but it does touch a lot of code. Is we added the max reconcile rate flag to Crossplane core, but we want to add it to effectively all providers as well. So there's a couple of places where that hasn't been done yet. I don't think we've yet updated TerraJet to add this flag when providers are generated. We haven't yet updated the provider template that some folks use to write sort of providers that aren't TerraJet based. And there's probably a handful of providers, I want to say like provider Azure out there at the moment that are, and provider SQL, provider Terraform, providers that are fairly popular that haven't had this flag added. I think I actually added a little list here of ones that I wanted to get. I don't think we need to have every provider in the world updated to do this. That would be a never-ending task for someone. But basically, adding this flag is usually a case of looking at one of the existing pull requests, adding the flag, and then plumbing it down to the controllers. So it's pretty boring work, to be completely honest. But it does need to. It would be good to get it done at some point. Does anyone know, has provider AWS been updated with this yet? I don't think it has, right? I don't think the ACK generator understands it either. I'm going to say no, it hasn't been done. So this is the last one, which is probably the least exciting one because it's very, very monotonous. So that's all of them. If anyone wants to help out, please let me know. Because as I say, I personally probably am not going to get much time to work on these, at least this quarter. Not likely next quarter either. So that's it for the community topics that we've got. Does anyone have any other topics or any PRs that they would like to discuss, or should we call it 15 minutes early?
So only to mention, I make in provider AWS the Go SDK bump. I will focus tomorrow on looking at the open points Murfak added to the review, and I think then we can go. I think I tested a lot of stuffs in the provider about this. It's Go SDK version 1. Yes, this one. Murfak did the review on this. And hopefully we can get it in because a lot of people's waiting for this. I think the Essentia and Deutsche Bahn guys needs this SDK bump for a lot of tagging stuff, and also a few resources waiting for this.
Nice.
So I think Jury also added something we are very needed in the provider for Carpenter makes working in our EKS setup. Thanks for this.
Cool stuff. Thanks a lot for bumping. You actually really unblocked me in this instance profile stuff. Yeah. Thank you.
Nice.
And then I have one other question. We not open an issue, but it's more a question. So for example, if you create a Kafka server in one region in AWS, and then you want to create a user for Kafka server normally in the same region for this server, but a user makes an issue and added the other region, then we're seeing that provider AWS is hitting the API every second. And we had it in the last week that AWS blocks our IAM users in the API, or our IAM user roles in the API, because we're making so much API requests. Did you have an idea what happened there? Why this? Also, is this an issue in the implementation for one of the ACK resources, or did we need to investigate something what happened under the hood?
Generally, if Crossplane is making a really tight loop of requests against the API inside, my hunch would be that it is a bug or an issue. This is something that the max reconcile rate feature would help to protect against if we got that into provider AWS, because it, I mean, depends. If you have it set to 100, it's going to allow total across all of provider AWS 100 API calls per second. Technically, it does 100 reconciles per second, so it could be a little bit more API calls, but it constrains that. So that's something that you can do to protect against it in general. But my hunch is it's probably a bug in one of the Kafka managed resources.
I believe I have seen, Chris, in alpha level additions to provider AWS, I've seen cases where like observe calls run away because something breaks in the observe call and it just immediately requeues, and you get kind of a flood of these requests. Yeah,
there's an unfortunate behavior in the well, I don't know if unfortunate is maybe not the right way to put it, but there is behavior in the controller runtime implementation, whereas if your reconciler returns an error, it just effectively immediately requeues. And that is subject to some rate limiting that's set up by default, but it allows you to do quite a couple of requests, I believe, before it starts backing off.
Okay, I will open after that an issue, because we had much users creating more than 100,000 users in the Kafka, server, for example, and then we're hitting immediately the issues in the AWS API. So we need to investigate what is the problem, if this is in the resource observer. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Aaron, also.
All right, folks. Any other topics before we wrap it up for the day?
I have one thing, Nick. Sorry, I joined late. If you back up to the CRD issue for the lazy loading and the issues with the API server, we've been working with AWS because we're seeing on our clusters, granted we have additional software on it versus just a vanilla cluster, that we're unable to even load the TerraJet provider. Like it fails out. And they're feeling that there's a conflicting software or conflicting CRDs that are causing the problem. And then they also have solutions for the client side throttling that you're going to possibly see for the cache, which I think is the another issue that I think is getting resolved in a later version of Kubernetes on how to update it. But
is that this kubectl 1.24 maybe, do you think?
Yes, I think that's going to be part of it. Cool.
And sorry, did you say, Jillian, did you say that was the AWS solutions folks that you're talking to?
Yes, because we're struggling on the TerraJet provider to get it fully installed. And we're not seeing any good logs, even if like to point to what's causing the problem or what could be potentially conflicting.
That's different. That's good to know, because that's different than what we've seen with EKS so far. As you know, Christopher mentioned that EKS works for him, but the professional services folks are like, hey, the memory usage is high, but it otherwise works. And in our experiments, we've usually found EKS to be the most resilient of all the hosted Kubernetes services. We haven't been able to break it ourselves using TerraJet yet. So I wonder if it's literally not finishing the install.
It's not finishing it basically, and then it sits in a failed state, and so then it's ready false, and then it just sits there and hangs. Even though we'll still continue to see client side throttling, but that's really the caching issue, not so much the install. So we've worked with EKS about increasing our size, like behind the scenes on the node. They've made it to the largest. We still can't install it. So we have credits on the professional service in professional services. So we may have them come dig into our clusters to see what potentially could be preventing the install, but we can't get it installed.
I can also add something. So we are normally working in EOS Central 1. There we have definitely no issue, only the discussion with the professional services guys. But for example, in EU West 1, so in Ireland, we had also the same issue that the jet providers are not finishing the install. So I think it depends on how the AWS guys are looking in the managed control planes, for example, how they are scaling up and so on. And I don't know if this could be also an issue, if how big are the instances in the background, and if they have instances available to upgrade.
Yeah, we worked with them and they gave us the largest one in our account, just so that, and I'd spun up a cluster with our entire platform on it, and it still didn't work.
Yeah, okay.
And we start with like 171 CRDs, but that includes, I think, the AWS provider that we have already installed in all of our clusters. So we're not, their thought is that either the AWS provider is potentially conflicting with the provider jet, or we have some software or another CRD that's providing a conflict. Yet I don't see any logs that show that there's a conflict.
Yeah, the regular AWS provider certainly shouldn't conflict with the jet provider. I think we would have
found that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if that was the case. I'm wondering whether there's, I don't know what the best place to report this is. I know that one of the folks at Upbound here is digging into these in general. There's currently in the process of opening a one-pager describing some of the problems that we've been seeing and what we can do to address them. but this is the first time I've heard a report of TerraGen literally not finishing an install. So if you don't mind raising an issue, if you haven't already, I would just raise it against probably maybe just Crossplane, if not the provided Jet AWS repo.
Okay.
And then it would be at least good to have that data point to point him at to consider.
Is this, for example, something we can add to the EKS roadmap in GitHub, that we can create an issue there and see if the EKS guys will answer this?
Yeah, that could certainly be worth trying. I think there's multiple fronts to look at this on. So far we're looking at from the sort of Crossplane community perspective, we want Crossplane to obviously work with any Kubernetes cluster within reason. So we're looking, if this is, let's say, just pure resource usage issues on the API server side, as in just memory and CPU and things like that. As Muvaf mentioned earlier, we're looking into whether we can do some profiling of the API server and see if there's obvious places to make it more performant. I've heard some speculation about lazy loading of CRDs in the API server. So we basically just would tell the API server, don't serve these CRDs until someone hits the endpoint for the first time. Don't start a handler for them at first. But that has a bunch of possible downsides. So I'd like to try and fix it generally in Kubernetes as much as possible before we start chasing the various hosted providers. In our experience, for instance, GKE is much less resilient to this than EKS.
Yeah.
There's also another ongoing conversation about finding ways to reduce the number of CRDs in the system. For instance, if someone doesn't use 600 of the 750 AWS CRDs, I think the philosophy we've had so far is if the reason that people want this is 90% performance, we'd rather just fix the performance issues so that people don't have to be configuring and tweaking what CRDs they have installed. So the ask there is that if folks have other use cases that aren't performance for this, and Christopher, I know you've given us some. Definitely.
We have some too.
All right.
Yeah, it's our security guys have problems if we add CRDs in our clusters. But I think we can have a chat about this because I can also add the regulatory stuff from the banking sector in Germany for this. And I think then I can add this in the ticket, and then all guys know what is the problem for the regulatory stuff if we add so many CRDs there, because then the auditors need to look in Kubernetes, in Airbag, in ISA roles, IAM policies, and so on. And then we hadn't had a never-ending story.
Yeah. I do remember what the issue was that we were discussing this in, Chris.
I think someone added a topic that we want to disable a few CRDs. I don't know correctly.
Yeah, like our use case is that we don't expose all of those resources to our platform users. So not all of AWS resources are available for anyone to create things to. So we want to restrict that from a platform delivery perspective. And we're also not going to abstract away everything. So we don't see a need to have that many CRDs.
Is that not something you can control with RBAC?
For what they have access to provision, yes. Just in general though, and again, I think from a security perspective is that we don't want all of these CRDs loaded in our clusters.
Okay.
They see it as bloat.
It's very hard for, I can only talk for my security guys. It's very hard for them, for example, because we have the option to assume other roles, etc. Mm-hmm. And we have also a lot of AWS accounts, and it's very hard to see for them or dig in all policies, what is allowed, what is not allowed. So they want to drop fully the CRDs we are not using in the clusters, for example, because it's very easy then.
Right. Well, and also say in general, most InfoSec teams are still very new on the cloud. So they get very nervous and want to fold back to old school ways.
I think it's at the end, it's the same on our side because
Yeah.
they're not very familiar with this.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the stuff that we've talked about with potentially implementing this in the past, that I believe actually someone opened a PR, and it makes upgrades more messy than they already are if you could potentially be upgrading to a revision that has CRDs turned off or more CRDs added, things like that. So it's definitely, I mean, this doesn't mean it's impossible, but it does make it challenging. The other approach that we've flirted with would be something like what the AWS controllers for Kubernetes folks do. And instead of there just being an AWS provider, there would be, 50 AWS providers. There'd be an S3 provider, an RDS provider, a yada yada provider, etc., which is definitely somewhat cleaner to implement. But then we have the problem where references between those different types we would not be able to happen at the sort of code internal level. We need more generic references. So actually fixing this is tough. So definitely getting changing this behavior. So definitely getting use cases from folks is very handy. I just added the issue there in the
Awesome.
so for folks to wait if you haven't already. All right, and we are now a little bit over time, so I have to run it. So I'm gonna call it for this meeting. Thank you very much, folks, for
Yes.
coming on.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye.